Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? It's been a perennial battle amongst nerds for literally decades now. Macs versus Windows PCs. And ultimately the topic of price always tends to come up. So, are Macs really more expensive? Alright, two fair bits of warning at the beginning of this episode for you. One, if you are very, very passionate about Windows computers and you absolutely hate Apple and it's something that just gets you totally worked up and sent into a tizzy, you're probably going to want to skip this episode. The second point is for those who are pedantic in nature. I am probably going to be using the term Windows and PC interchangeably throughout this episode to refer to the same thing. That is a personal computer that runs the Windows operating system. Yes, I know Macs are also personal computers, but here on planet Earth and in colloquial terms, we generally use the terms Windows and PCs interchangeably, so just a bit of a heads up there. Okay, so this story is basically kind of started by the fact that I got a new computer. If you've been following me on Twitter for a while now, you know that I have been saving up for quite a while for a new iMac, and there was a little bit of a challenge in actually getting my new iMac and, you know, getting the config I want and getting it shipped into me in a timely manner and all of that. Ultimately, all that's been sorted out. I have it sitting here in front of me. It is an absolutely glorious machine. As part of that conversation on Twitter that I had with a lot of my followers, the topic of cost was brought up. You know, why do I even use a Mac? And even more so, like, why don't I just build a PC? It would be so much cheaper, you know? And yeah, it would be cheaper in a way, but you kind of got to look at the big picture. And that's what I'm hoping to at least explore or address in this topic. I did a bit of homework on this one, so I'm going to kind of lead you through it. And like with all the podcast topics, I really want you to come to your own conclusion and opinion. This is really just meant to spur thinking, but I'm going to give you a specific example that has some very interesting real-world numbers behind it. So let's talk about the computer that I bought. It's one of the new mid-2017 5K iMacs. It's got a beautiful 27-inch Retina display. It's high resolution. I did a few upgrades from that stock config. So I upgraded to the 4.2 gigahertz Intel Core i7. That's a quad-core desktop chip. I kept the original 8 gig of RAM in the system. I'll talk a bit about that more in a second. I upgraded to a 512 gig SSD internally. I had that same size of SSD in my previous 27-inch iMac, but it was a regular SATA drive, and the built-in ones you can get on the new machines are all the NVMe Express acronyms. The PCIe-based drives, so they're ridiculously fast, so I figured that'd be worth doing an upgrade to. And then I also upgraded the graphics to the top-end option, where it's an AMD Radeon Pro 580, 8 gigabytes of video memory. That computer itself, normal price is $2,699, so $2,700. That doesn't count tax. I'm not going to count tax for this example because that can vary for various people and how you buy. But $2,700 US for that machine as is. Now, 8 gig of RAM kind of sucks. For a lot of people, it's fine, but for me, that's not quite enough, especially since I edit video and do kind of high performance stuff on the computer. So I opted to upgrade the machine to 32 gigabytes of RAM, but I did so myself. This machine is actually fully supported for RAM upgrades. Apple even has a page on its site that shows you how to do it. It's really pretty easy. A little door comes off the back and the RAM slots are right there, and you can pop in new RAM and latch them in and then put the door back on and you're good. So 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM cost me about $250 from B&H. So all said and done, we're looking at about $2,950, almost $3,000 for this absolute beast of a machine. $3,000, a lot of money for a computer in 2017, but considering the specs, I don't think it's too bad, but that's personal opinion. Let's put these numbers to the test. There have been, calls, well, you could get, a PC for cheaper, like I said on Twitter. So I went down that path just out of curiosity. Now, I can't get a PC built that's identical to this iMac, but I can get the components very, very close. The first place I looked was at a pre-built machine, because oftentimes pre-built machines can be less expensive than building one yourself. So I ended up settling with the Alienware Aurora tower for the example. There's a few other manufacturers that have these kind of higher spec machines. I picked the Aurora because it's the one that let me pick the best options in its online configurator in terms of the specs. A lot of the other sites were just kind of pre-built systems, and they were what they were, and it really wouldn't be financially advantageous to buy one of those and then swap out a bunch of parts. But even then, that Alienware Aurora with identical specs, or as close as I could get to this iMac, that machine came in at about $2,000. And that didn't even include the cost of a monitor. Now, one thing about the computer market when you're buying full systems is, like I just said, a lot of times pre-built machines can be less expensive, but I've found that to generally apply mostly towards the lower end machines, the less expensive, not so much enthusiast kind of stuff. Once you start getting into dedicated like gaming PCs or workstations, stuff where people need higher end parts, that's where the companies start to actually make a margin again, as opposed to those less expensive machines where a lot of times big name manufacturers literally don't make any money off of that hardware. It's only through kind of special deals with software manufacturers where will they make a little bit of profit on it. In case you're wondering, that's where all that bloatware and junkware on a brand new PC comes from. Yeah, the manufacturer's paid to put it there. So these higher end machines, there's going to be a bit of profit. So I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe I could do a little bit better than the way that Alienware turned out in the pricing. So I hit up PC Part Picker and I built a config there. So I figured let's step through it together, and you can see the exact parts that I picked and what the pricing came down to and how it compares. So of course it all starts with the CPU, and I picked the exact same CPU that's in my iMac, the Intel Core i7 7700K. Yes, the iMac comes with the K version in it because that is the 4.2 gigahertz quad core. It's a desktop chip, very, very fast. It's literally twice as fast on multi-core in Geekbench than my old machine from 2011. And that old machine was an i7 2600. So that was a 3.4 gig quad core. So this new CPU, 7700K, it's quite a beast. That CPU, just by itself in a retail box, goes for $308. Okay, well, we need something to cool that CPU. And I'm going to say I'm trying to keep the pricing on all of these parts skewed in the build's favor. These are not necessarily all of the parts that I would buy if I were to actually build this system myself. But because I know there's a lot of people who are still watching this, even though I threw the disclaimer at the beginning, they're still watching this who really, really, really want the PC build to win out over the iMac. Okay, I'm trying to skew things intentionally in the PC build's favor. So CPU cooler, I'm just going air cooling. A CryoRig H7, it's a pretty basic heatsink fan. It'll do the job. Will it be amazing? No. Will it be loud? Yeah, maybe, but it's a good match for this CPU, $35. Motherboard, kind of the same thing. I'm not going super high end. I'm not going super bells and whistles. I'm going with a decent mid-range board that supports all the features that I need it to support. So I settled on the Asus Prime Z270A. That board goes for $160. RAM, obviously I need to match that 32 gig like I built in the iMac. So I went with Crucial Ballistic Sport LT. Obviously those are desktop sticks of RAM, and a kit of those goes for $254. Storage. Like I mentioned, I have a 512 gig M.2-ish. It's kind of proprietary on the Apple side, but it is NVMe Express. It's the PCIe based SSDs, so I need to kind of go at least to that class of SSD to keep things somewhat fair. So I picked the Samsung 960 Pro in a 512 gig capacity, and that is an M.2 kind of blade SSD. Those go for $280. Graphics. This is where things get a little bit tricky. So the iMac has a Radeon Pro 580, and that's an 8 gigabyte card. It is integrated into the motherboard, and the thing is, that series of graphics, that whole Radeon Pro 5 series, at least the 570, the 575, and the 580, as are offered as options in the iMac, they are OEM only parts, meaning I can't go and buy a Radeon Pro 580 in the form of a PCIe video card for PCs. However, it seems like they pretty much match their AMD RX series counterparts. They might be a little bit slower because I think the chip's TDP is a little bit lower. They consume just a bit less power, I think, for the purposes of managing heat. But in general, they should be pretty similar results. So I'm going to throw things in the Windows PC's favor a little bit, and I'm going to say that a slightly lower end card will be an equivalent match to what's in the iMac. So I picked a Radeon RX 580, but 4 gigabyte card. That card goes for $400. Now, this is another case where if I was building this computer for myself for real, I wouldn't even be buying AMD graphics. I'd be sticking like an NVIDIA like 1070 or something in there. 1080 I think is a little bit too high end for what I would need. And supposedly the Pro 580 graphics kind of sit performance-wise in between a 1060 and a 1070. I'm a much bigger fan of NVIDIA graphics than I am AMD's graphics. I wish Apple would switch back, but it is what it is. Anyway, that RX 580 card, $400 is what we're throwing in there. We need a case to build all of this in. I actually found one that's pretty slick, and I'd probably buy it myself if I were to build this system. It's the NZXT S340, and they have it in white. It's like kind of a glossy white. Windows on the side. I don't really care about windows on the side, but it's a sexy looking case. $70, which is actually, I think, a pretty reasonable price for a decent case like that. Need something to power it all, so I'm picking an EVGA Supernova power supply. It's a 650 watt unit. Should be plenty of juice. Those go for $75. Finally, we need an operating system to run on here. I could run Linux and I could turn this build into a Hackintosh, but I think the point of people saying you could build a Windows PC for cheaper would be so that I could actually run Windows on it. So a copy of Windows 10 Home 64-bit edition goes for $90. You add up all of these parts, and according to PC Part Picker, after some rebates, and this is all when I built this config, you're looking at $1,671.69. So we are a good few $100 cheaper than that Alienware. And, you know, it just goes to show you can build a PC yourself, at least towards the higher end, cheaper than you can build one. There's, of course, buy a pre-built one. There's a couple of considerations. The first is there's no like central single warranty for a system like this. If a part fails in it, I'm up to, having to troubleshoot it. I have to figure out which part it is that failed and why, and then I'm at the mercy of the manufacturer to replace out that part, and who knows how long it would take that part to get replaced. So it's entirely possible that I could be without a computer, for a length of time if I were to pre-build one, which is, I think, maybe something in a commercially built system's favor. At that Alienware, if something fails, you call them up, and in a couple of days, they have a replacement part for you, and it's up to them to troubleshoot what's wrong. The other thing about this build is there's no monitor, as I mentioned. The iMac has a 27-inch 5K display built in, and it's a really, really nice panel. It's bright, it's got very good color reproduction, very rich, wide color space. It's great for doing creative work. 4K monitors seem to really be kind of the popular sweet spot right now, and we're starting to see 8K monitors, but those are terribly expensive. I do want to try to, match specs with the iMac again, so we need to go with a 27-inch 5K display. The most logical choice is going to be the LG Ultrafine display. That's the one that Apple and LG kind of partnered with to come out with a while back, towards the end of 2016. It's $1,300 on its own. Now, you may be crying foul, yeah, but that's, a Thunderbolt 3 monitor. That's not going to work with the graphics card that you picked. Well, I'm going to ask for a little bit of leniency and flexibility on your part here. There have been 5K displays manufactured by other companies since that LG display came out. Towards the beginning of 2017, we saw at least a couple of monitors. One was from Dell. It's the UP2715K. And another one is the HP Z27Q. I don't know who comes up with these model names, but anyway, they are both 27-inch 5K displays, and they would work with the video card that we picked because they simply use two DisplayPort cables to connect back to the PC, and they do this thing called stitching where they basically take two separate signals and kind of put them back together in the monitor. I suspect that's the reason why they ended up getting discontinued, but they got discontinued. So the only real monitor on the market right now is that LG Ultrafine display. However, and this is where I'm asking for a little bit of leniency, when they were on the market, both that Dell and HP generally went for right around that $1,300 mark. So I'm asking you to kind of grant me, some flexibility here, and let's just pretend that the Dell or the HP monitor were still able to be sold, or that magically that LG display would work with the video card we picked. So we'll allocate $1,300 US for a monitor. Well, tack that on to the cost of the PC we built, $1,670. We're awful close to the price of that iMac. Actually, we are right at about the price of that iMac. Funny how that works out. And did I mention that the iMac comes with a card reader built into it, as well as a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, which are things that I intentionally left out of the PC build? I'm not trying to engage smug mode here, folks, but the numbers, right? The numbers. One other thing that I found really interesting, and this is just indicative of where the PC and computing in general market is going. Microsoft has been getting into hardware, PC hardware, for a little while now, a few years. And they, I can't remember exactly when, it was probably about a year ago, introduced a really interesting desktop that they called the Surface Studio. And it is an all-in-one, has a built-in display. It's not a 5K display. It's actually kind of an odd aspect ratio. But it's pretty slick-looking hardware. It's expensive. Even though it's got a really cool big display that's articulating, and it's even a touch screen, and it's really obviously geared towards graphics designers and artists, not even for video editors or anything like that. It's really more for kind of static content. It's a shot across the bow of Wacom's products for, pen input on computers, that sort of thing, the design tablets. But it's an expensive beast. It still doesn't even hold a candle to the performance of the iMac that I bought or the PC that we just built here together, on paper at least. But the high-end machine on, that Surface Studio goes for over $4,000. This is indicative of where the market is going. It's really getting split, and prices are trending upwards. I think a lot of it is because people aren't upgrading their computers nearly as frequently as they used to. And they're also finding replacements for computers. Plenty of people are still going out and buying inexpensive PCs. You can buy a laptop for just a couple $100 and it'll probably work just fine. But I think a lot of people are kind of getting split in that if you're going to go buy a couple $100 laptop, I think a decent number of people are considering a tablet instead, which are smaller and lighter and thinner, and maybe a little bit more expensive if you buy a nice one, but they're a lot more convenient, they're a lot simpler to use, they're much less likely to fail or break, there's no moving parts, that sort of thing. So the PC industry is trending towards the higher end of the spectrum, which is something that arguably Apple has been doing all along, right? The cheapest Apple laptops are about $1,000. You can't walk into a store and buy a $300 MacBook, at least not a new one. So the market's heading that way in general, just because I think it's tired of making really thin margins on stuff. So we've been seeing this major increase in quality. I'm sure that Alienware Aurora that we kind of looked at here is built really well, and there are lots of other even like laptops that are coming out that are really, really built well, and it's great to see, but it is pushing those prices higher. And so I guess the takeaway from this whole exercise is the playing field is getting leveled. And by the way, before we wrap this up, I should note I also did another quick config of that same PC that we did on PC Part Picker, but I picked the 8GB version of that RX 580 instead of the 5GB. That total cost went to $1,872.69. That makes it, with the monitor, even more expensive than the iMac. So it really all comes down to specifically what you're looking to buy and what your needs are. I've said this before, probably a long time ago, and I don't even remember what episode it was in, but I'm going to say it again, and I'll probably say it again as we tackle topics like this in the future. I'm not a diehard, crazy Mac user. My day job, I work on Windows all day. I come home and I use a Mac because it's a tool, and it's a tool that helps me do the things that I need to do. That's the way I prefer to think of all this kind of stuff. A lot of people like to turn it into kind of like a religious argument almost, where, oh, you're a PC person, or oh, you're a Mac person, or whatever. I'm a computer person. I happen to like what Apple does with its computers. I happen to like the way its operating system works, but it's a tool. And if I were to completely change focus and, maybe give up on YouTube and just decide, screw it, I want to play PC games all the time, I'm going to go out and build that computer that we just talked about, right? I'm going to go build a gaming PC because I'll be one of the first to admit that Macs suck at gaming. Not for lack of trying, but they're just not, it's not there. Either yet or maybe ever. I don't know. But computers are tools, and you just got to go with what you prefer and what works best for you. And I wish we could get past this whole, kind of judgment that gets passed on people and get past all the preconceived notions and all the hate and everything that exists. Because another thing that I've said before, and I will also say again in the future, is I think technology should be uniting us and not dividing us. But this really just goes to show that, computers are computers, and the playing field, it's getting leveled as the entire market kind of goes through some turmoil with this just massive, massive push from mobile technology. So with that, I am curious as to your thoughts. Are you a Mac person? Are you a PC person? Do you use both? Do you have just an absolute passionate opinion about one or the other, or are you a little bit more even-keeled and kind of believe in that whole it's just a tool philosophy. I'm just curious as to your thoughts. Please be nice, but leave them down in the comments below. So if you like this episode, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.